I'm a believer that this team's going to win the national championships.
The rivalries, it's up there on top of the list, man. And if we allow them to devalue it, we lose a lot of what makes college football special. Don't let them do it. Don't let them devalue what it means to you. And welcome into JUCK on Bucks on a Friday. Appreciate y'all so much for joining me. We've got practice today. The Bucks are back at it. They will be back at it again on Saturday. Remember, they're doing 4 practices, then 4 practices, then 4 practices, then 3 practices. Last one being the spring showcase, which going to be more football because Ryan Day heard us crying about it. So he's adjusted, and good on him for doing that. We really appreciate that. So not a ton to talk about today in terms of spring practice, but we do got some stuff to talk about. And if you haven't seen the little breaking news video I put out last night, or anybody else's, I'm sure there have been a lot by now, the Matt Weiss situation, if you haven't heard, I'll run it down real quick. So Matt Weiss was a coach at Michigan, offensive coordinator, co-offensive coordinator, and quarterbacks coach who was fired in 2023, the Stallions year. And it was leaked that the FBI was investigating him for computer crimes, and the feds have indicted him, and that just came out yesterday. And that indictment is a 24-count indictment. 14 of those indictments are computer crimes that carry 5 years apiece for each one, and 10 of them are identity theft crimes that carry up to 2 years for each one of those. So this is a guy looking at serious time. What was he doing? He somehow got access to 150,000 student athletes' information, medical records, zeroed in on like 2,000 of them, got information into their cloud, into their photos, and into their emails. And the FBI alleges that he was doing this all for the purpose of attempting to find sexual content, pictures, videos, etc. And he did this over a long period of time, from 2015 to 2023 when he was caught. And he would go back months and years later to try to find updated content from some of his favorites. And he knew who his favorites were because he kept a running notebook that included physical attributes, what they were into. And we're talking about a sick cookie. And just one more example of the total lack of control and oversight that was going on in that program under Jim Harbaugh. It's really unbelievable when you think about it. I mean, this is real world stuff with like real world victims. This is different, obviously, than Connor Stallions, though that, very serious in the world of college football. This is real world stuff. This is different than the COVID dead period recruiting, which a lot, they got violations for that. They got big penalties for that. A lot of people laugh at that. I'm not someone who laughs at that at all, but it's just a huge ball when you look at it, just of crap under this guy's watch, that if I was a Michigan fan, I'd be pretty embarrassed by it. I'd have a hard time looking at Jim Harbaugh the same way after he saddled us with all of this crap. Like, that's how I'd be feeling. And, I'm sure they're fine with it because they revere Stallions, who they say gave them no advantage. Though they revere him, I don't know why you would revere him if he just gave you a bunch of crap at your doorstep, but no advantage. At any rate, I'm very happy to be a Buckeye, as always. And I'm very happy about spring practice going on. I'm very happy about the current roster, which is really surprising me as I look at it deep, and talked to Dylan about that yesterday. And most especially, I'm very happy about Ryan Day right now and everything that he has done this offseason since he's won the national championship, which I totally agree with every single move he's made. I think the staff is one of the very best in college football, as usual, and I'm really excited for it. So I wanted to get in a little bit on Ryan Day today and where he stands right now in the world of coaching after news came out about Georgia. And I want to talk about that Georgia program, and I'm going to explain exactly why I feel that Kirby Smart is no longer the best coach in college football. Georgia is no longer the premier college football program, and those titles both belong to Ohio State and Ryan Day. But I don't just throw things out without backing them up, so allow me to state my case about why the Georgia program is no longer in position to be considered the premier program in college football, as most have agreed upon for the past several years that it has been. There's a lot of people comparing the Ohio State roster and this Ohio State team in 2025 to the 2024 Ohio State National Championship team. And while that's fun to do, that's not who this team's going to be playing against. The 2025 Ohio State Buckeyes don't need to be better than that team. In fact, that team was maybe a little better than it even needed to be to win the national championship. I don't think this team needs to be that good. All they need to do is be better than the best teams in the country. They need to beat those teams, not the 2024 Buckeyes. So who are those teams in 2025? The teams that are on the same level as the team that I perceive to have the most talented roster in college football again, and that's Ohio State. We got our usual suspects of late. The top 4 programs in the country currently, and I mean entering last year, entering this year, and entering next year, the programs that are in the best shape right now to compete annually for national championships, there's 4 clear-cut ones, and it's Ohio State, it's Georgia, and it's now Texas and Oregon. And just looking at the rosters, the coaching staffs, the financial backing, the recruiting machine, the situation that all 4 of those programs are in, as we enter 2025, the 2 clear-cut ones out of those 4 are Texas and Ohio State. Entering 2024, it was Georgia and Ohio State. Next year, it may be 2 different of those 4, but it's going to be those 4 at the top. The other teams that I think programs, not teams, but programs in general that are in that next tier, ready to jump in, trying to jump in to get to those top 4, Notre Dame, Alabama, and Clemson. Alabama, kind of iffy. We're not so sold on Kalen DeBoer yet. I'm a believer. I think that they will eventually get into that group. A lot of people aren't. They're not there yet, that's for sure. He's not proven. Clemson has had a dip, but a dip by the new standards that Dabo Swinney set. That's not what Clemson has been historically. He set those new standards. He's a heck of a coach and a heck of a program builder, and he's done it once. He's now evolving a little bit, and we're going to see him maybe do it again. Their program this year looks to be in great shape. Their recruiting class is excellent. It has fallen off a little bit, but they're poised to come back up into the conversation here in the next couple of years. And Notre Dame, under Marcus Freeman, definitely poised to potentially take that next step into an annual national championship contender. And we've talked recently about Ryan Day being all of a sudden elevated on most people's list, most of the pundits, to the second best coach in college football. He was last year entering the season outside a lot of people's last 5, at the bottom of a lot of people's top. He was out of the top 5s. He was down at the bottom of some people's top 10s, which is funny, right? We know it's funny, but you certainly can see the knocks a lot of people had on him. When you talk about Ryan Day before 2024, he had a couple Big Ten championships, but they were early in his career. He had been on a drought, still is on a drought. The last time he was in the playoffs, the team was embarrassed in the national championship game. He had not done good against his rival, of course. And if you look at all those issues, he also was widely criticized as a guy who took over a machine, and while he didn't let the machine go backwards, he didn't do anything to elevate it. He hadn't done as much as Urban Meyer would have. Urban Meyer, of course, widely considered as one of the top 10 best coaches in the history of college football. But that was another knock that people had about Ryan Day. Now, if you look at any one of those issues I just listed with a little more nuance, you can certainly make a case that Ryan Day was already in the top 3 coaches list if you were really being serious about it. But he wasn't for almost anybody. Well, now Ryan Day has cashed in on the national championship. Not only did he cash in on the national championship, but he was the head coach who built that roster. He took over Urban's. He built that roster with the class of 2021, which was the best class in Ohio State history. 7 5-stars, 12 top 100 players. And he saw that from start to finish to their senior year. And in many's opinion, due to the changes in college football, that Ohio State team was a super team, the likes of which we won't see again. 2019 LSU, 2020 Bama, several Bama teams, 2021 Georgia. teams that just ooze talent that is almost impossible in the new system of college football to be able to collect on one roster. 2024 Ohio State fits the bill, and many people think that's the last one. And he built that team. That takes a heck of a coach to do that. These big times programs no longer have the ability to keep that second and third string guy waiting in the wings when he can go start somewhere and triple what he's making. It just doesn't work anymore. Ryan Day was also able to overcome adversity through losing the Michigan game, having what I consider to be the lowest down period while still entering the postseason that maybe we've ever had in Ohio State history. I mean, certainly one. Yeah, it definitely was. That was the lowest point when you had a game left to play that we've ever seen. It might have been due to the social media aspect of it. One of the lower points that I've ever experienced as an Ohio State fan in my life, right? I lived through the Cooper era, but there wasn't social media. So even though there were times under Cooper where losing the game would have been like, catastrophic, huge, crazy meltdowns, there were, but we didn't get to communicate then like we do now. And because of that, it made that loss this year, which was one of the biggest upsets in the history of the game, it made it so much more magnified, right? So that adversity that he entered the playoffs with, being able to overcome that, get his teams head on straight, and then go through the craziest 4-game stretch we've ever seen to win a national championship, a huge feather in his cap. Now, you got to give it today. He is the clear number 2 after all this. Behind Kirby Smart is what is kind of the line everybody's saying now. Assumed to be behind Kirby Smart because Kirby Smart has 2 national championships. And if that's your logic, that's fair logic. But if that's your logic, you better not have Ryan Day over Dabo Swinney. Because if you say the difference between Ryan Day and Kirby Smart is that Kirby Smart has 2 national championships, Dabo Swinney has 2 national championships. He has more playoff appearances than Ryan Day, more conference titles. He has more national championship game appearances. He built a program that was nothing like Ohio State or Alabama into a program that now, if they're not on the level of Ohio State and Georgia, we view it as the program's on a downswing. Clemson was never that. They had 1 national championship in program history, but they were a top ACC program, never a national championship contender, certainly not annually. They were a good team. They were a good quality program in the ACC. Nothing like he built them into. So if Dabo Swinney is behind Ryan Day, I think you need to reevaluate your standards, because if Kirby's won because he has 2 national championships, then you ought to have Dabo number 2. My point is, these lists are stupid, but I'm going to play. I'm going to play right now because I feel like there is something different that's gone on here. There's a little something different when we talk about Georgia football. Obviously, we skew these kind of talks about what's happening most recently. What's most recently happening in the sport is what's most relevant on people's minds, and it's the clearest indicator of what's going to happen moving forward. And if we're talking about Georgia football, which we want to talk about anyway, because we're going to talk about Oregon, we're going to talk about Texas, we're going to talk about Georgia, we're going to talk about all of Ohio State's stiffest competition to make sure that we know our enemy, right? Because that's who we're comparing this Ohio State 2025 program to, the enemy. Now, Georgia football, in my opinion, was a little disrespected last year. No, they didn't win the national championship. They had the single toughest schedule in college football last year. And you can't really expect a program as good as Georgia has been recently to win a national championship every other year or even every third year. No, Kirby is not Nick Saban. Georgia is not peak Alabama. It's just not. We'll never see anything like that again. We've got to get that standard out of our head. We've got to get back to a different mentality when it comes to what greatness looks like, because that was something totally different that we'll never see again. But Kirby Smart, a coach who has taken Georgia football, which kind of was a sleeping giant since the talent boom in the state, and turned the program into the corresponding program. Georgia talent, what we've seen in the explosion of high school level football in the state of Georgia is really insane. The passing of California and now even Florida in high level prospects, it's particularly wild. And especially when we talk about maybe the most important single area of a football team in college football, and that is getting those alien defensive linemen. And once again, as we enter the 2026 recruiting class, Georgia has 5 of the top 10 again, right there in state. It's just crazy. It really is. It's crazy. They've got like 5 of the top 10 running backs as well. It's just nuts. In Georgia, a program that I'm not saying anything negative about Georgia out of hate or disdain for the program. Georgia was the program I rooted for in the SEC growing up. This is not, there's programs I hate. There's programs I like. I've always liked the Georgia program. And the odds of my beloved Buckeyes playing them when I was a kid were 1 in a million. So I felt like it was cool for me to root for them and root for Oregon in the Pac-12. That was my Pac-12, Pac-10 team. And coincidentally, these are now 2 teams that are in that top 4 with Ohio State, which is very odd. But it makes me a lot more familiar with both of these programs because I've followed them all my life. But when we talk about Georgia, this program, I really liked what they were able to do entering the season here with their receiver core. We know it was a talented core last year that just couldn't catch the ball. They led not just the SEC, but the country in dropped balls. It was embarrassing. It was a lot of the reason Carson Beck sucked so bad. And it was just something that you never expect to see at such a high level program, to have so many guys have the same issue over and over and over again. More on that later. They bring in Zachariah Branch from USC, who I think can be a total game changer. We've seen him just absolutely make our jaws drop as an electric player at USC, not so much as a receiver, more as a returner, but we've seen the freakish athleticism, a kid who should have been a Buckeye. Then they bring in Noah Thomas, another wide receiver from Texas A&M, who had a good amount of production last year, and he's just one of these super tall, long-armed, long-limbed kind of dudes that everybody's looking for now. And then they bring back Colby Young, who they had brought in the previous year from the transfer portal. And he's another guy built just like Noah Young, really long, really exciting, fast. And he didn't get to play for them last year. He's one of the guys that got arrested for a pretty serious charge, was off the team until that was settled. He'll now be back on the team. Now you've got all 3 of those guys. You got some more homegrown talent. You got a freshman in Taylon Taylor, who was a top wide receiver, a guy they don't usually get commit to Georgia, that Brian Hartline was after really hard. So they get him coming in. Gunnar Stockton will lead the team at quarterback this year, most likely. I'm not enamored with him as a passer of the football. I think that Ryan Puglisi, the young guy in the system, might not be quite ready. Got a ton of arm talent. If they got a little consistency out of him, enough that they felt they could start him, I'd feel a lot more confident about that offense. And when we talk about the Georgia defense, they lost a good amount, but there's never really a reason to be concerned that the Georgia defense will be a liability or hold them back. It wasn't great last year, but certainly good enough. We saw them last year, though, get absolutely destroyed by Ole Miss and Bama. Look, I don't care what the final score of that game was in the second half, or that Georgia was able to regain the lead late. It would have been probably in my lifetime, the greatest comeback I've ever seen. But that game was a blowout. It was a blowout in the first half. And in the second half, you're playing a totally different ball game where one team is going for it on fourth every single time. The other team totally shuts it down. It's just a totally different ball game, right? When they were playing mano a mano, Bama whacked them, and so did Ole Miss. So to me, they got mollywopped twice. And then they lost to Notre Dame in a game that they kind of gave away with their new starting quarterback. Then you get to practice on Monday. And this is Kirby speaking after practice on Monday.
You're coaching me hard. They can't go. I'm tired. You're telling me I got to play with effort? They're offended when you coach them. They're all tired. Our guys are offended by it. They have to be willing to receive coaching. I'm not talking about the freshmen. I'm talking about in general.
We're talking about a coach who can be so incredibly selective about the talent that he brings into the program that he can let guys like Caden McDonald go to Ohio State and be one of their best defensive linemen because he's a couple inches too short. And Georgia doesn't feel it a bit. That's how selective this man can be. Now, if you have the ability to be that selective, how is it that you seem to wind up with dudes on your team, a large swath of whom do not respect you as a coach, you as an individual, your program, their teammates, the community, the university, or really themselves? Over and over and over, after we saw deaths on the Georgia football team, reckless driving after DUI, after speeding, nonstop for a year and a half. And we thought there was a little blip in the radar here. It seemed like maybe this was cleared up until this week. Word out of Georgia again. Nitro Tuggle and Marcus Easley have been suspended indefinitely from all team activities. There will be no further comment from Georgia Bulldogs on SI. Georgia wide receiver Nitro Tuggle was arrested for reckless driving and speeding beyond legal limits. There has been no official report on Easley's incident. However, sources have told Georgia Bulldogs on SI that Easley was involved in a one-car crash earlier this week that required a stint in the hospital. So not one, but two more Georgia driving-related incidents. And two more guys that don't give a damn about the program, the coach, the community, their teammates, the university, the image, or really themselves. So here we go again. The same thing over and over and over again. And you're going to tell me that when the margin is razor thin, that this guy is a better head coach than Ryan Day? I've been on board with it for a long time. That's over. That time's done. There's only one thing that separates these two on the field, and that's one national championship that was decided with the two of them on the field by 1 point in a game that, quite honestly, I feel Ryan Day outcoached Kirby Smart. And when you take the programs in totality, the direction that these two are going, Ohio State, not only led by the best coach in college football right now, but it is the premier program in college football right now. It has overtaken Georgia. There is no chance in hell you're going to convince me that that guy and that program that we see this stuff coming out of is the program that is the premier program in college football. That's over. I guess the one good thing about the situation with Kirby is we have seen that these guys have been suspended immediately because he went an entire year of this stuff happening, taking zero action at all. He used to say, well, our players are the most educated on this topic than anyone in the country, and it consistently kept happening and happening. He wasn't suspending anybody, and certain people in the media were coming out and defending him. What's he supposed to do? Kick him off the team? No. There's a whole lot of things you can do between nothing and kicking somebody off the team. And Georgia's just now decided they're going to take action and suspend guys indefinitely for blatantly disrespecting everybody in the community and their program and their coach. So that's the state of Georgia football. What I'm telling you is I like the Buckeyes odds this year when it comes to Georgia. All right, let's get to a couple of your comments before we wrap her up here. Jesus Christ is King 87 asks, what running back would you compare him to? Now, he's talking about freshman Bo Jackson. It doesn't have to be a former Buckeye. I actually got a really close comp. I feel that Amarian Hampton from North Carolina is a perfect comp to Bo with identical size, identical speed. I really think that he runs quite a bit like him. And I know that, not everybody is hip to Amarian Hampton, but check him out. Sub 4.5 guy with pretty much the exact same size as Bo. Now, Bo probably get a little bigger, but I think that it's a really close comp, and we're talking about a guy who rushed for 1,600 yards last year. So all good news there. Lossless says, thanks for the great content, JUCK. I find it interesting that we find ourselves talking about our D-line concern. How many years we got to do this? There is a constant, LJ. Lossless, you're absolutely right. And just like I said when I was getting myself worked up about it one day, sometimes we go into seasons thinking this, and what happens? Somebody pops. Maybe two guys pop, And then we look back and say, what were we ever worried about? So you make a great point. However, if we're just looking at every single room as far as the depth of talent, it stands out. It stands out as the one that doesn't have that depth of, I'll say this, obvious talent. That's a better way to put it. It doesn't have that obvious talent. We haven't seen it yet out of those guys. But you're right. You make a really good point. Anthony says, tell me why you have so much faith in Arch Manning. What has he done? Please answer that question. Give me one thing that he has done last year. Anthony, this is college football, bro. We turn over quarterbacks at programs every other year, sometimes every year. Are you trying to tell me you've never had faith in a quarterback based off of the traits he's shown you before he became the starter of the team? I certainly have a lot of different guys. Sometimes I'm right, sometimes I'm wrong. I'm quite certain you probably have too. Arch Manning, what has he shown us? Well, he's shown us, number one, that he has a great physical frame, that he's athletic, that he has a cannon of an arm, that he has a really pretty square mental makeup. We're talking about a guy who has kept himself out of the limelight intentionally and has been guided by some of the best. As far as on the field, we've seen many more starts than we've seen of Julian Sayin, who I've also told you I have faith in, right? So if you're going to ask that question, I think you should be asking about why I have faith in Julian Sayin. I have faith in Arch Manning. I've actually seen him do really good things on the football field. I've seen him bust off 40-yard runs. I've seen him drop dimes. I've seen his arm in a college football game, granted not against great competition, but I've seen him drop dimes, right? Like, I've seen him do much, much more than I've seen Julian Sayin, who I also have faith in. So a lot of times it's based on trait, mental makeup, and all those other things that we often kind of wrap up into what we think makes a successful college quarterback before we actually get to put our eyes on it. I mean, part of the fun of sports talk is making predictions of what we think is going to happen. I think Arch Manning is going to be very successful. I don't want to wish bad on him, but I don't want him to be ultra successful because I want to win national championships. And I think aside from Ohio State, Texas has the best roster in the country. If he's a really, really good quarterback, we might have an issue. Mirth 435 drops $1.99 in the comments section. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Wanted to make sure I acknowledge you. Minivan Dad says Isaiah West is absolutely jacked. He is ridiculous. If you've never seen Isaiah West's thighs, I'm going to try to pull a picture up of his thighs and edit it in here and show you what this kid's thighs looked like at 16 years old. It's, matter of fact, when I interviewed him on the show here, I asked him about it. He's just always had them, but they are ridiculous. And finally, Steven says, what? Best roster in college football? Apparently, you have personally reviewed all of the rosters in the top 25 college football. Dude, listen, buddy, are you honestly under the impression that there are 25 teams that could come even close to the top 5 rosters in college football? It's pretty easy. There's about 6 that even have a shot of being in that discussion every single year, and you can knock them off pretty quick. But yes, there are 2 rosters right now that currently stand out slightly above 3 and 4. That's Ohio State and Texas, 3 and 4, Georgia and Oregon. And absolutely, I believe Ohio State's is slightly better than Texas. So that's the amount of breaking down you need to do. We don't need to go down to the number 16 team in the top 25 because it's quite obvious they're not even close. I mean, that's just silly right there. But he goes on further to say, wow, Juck, you've now switched to taking your overhyped Buckeyes football propaganda intravenously. I'm over and out with your nonsense. If you think that I am some sunshine pumper, man, I got a pile of comments to show you, buddy. At any rate, enjoy it out there on your new show. Sorry to see you go. Have a fantastic evening. And you folks as well, the ones that are coming back, have a fantastic evening. I appreciate you all so much. I'll talk to you soon. Juck and Bucks out.